on Venezuela, of course, and how US sanctions deny Venezuelans the right to food, which, is yet another crime against humanity, which is very appropriate to have this seminar given what is going on with the aggression against Venezuela by the United States and its allies in the region as well as internationally. The sanctions against Venezuela are really terrible. They began in a serious manner, systematic manner in 2015. They involve the confiscation of assets of Venezuela in the United States and elsewhere. They involve the illegal retaining of resources that belong to the Venezuelan state and the Venezuelan people. The total amounts, according to some of the information that is coming through, is in the region of between $40 to $60 billion, which are illegally being taken from the Venezuelan state and the Venezuelan people. These highlight the role of the Bank of England that is retaining illegally something in the region of $2 billion in 31 tons of gold that belong to the Venezuelan state and the Venezuelan people. The sanctions have involved not just economic sanctions, not just finances, not just oil, not just gold, not just commerce, but also have involved paramilitary aggression, threats of military invasion, and now, including targeting of the food, which it couldn't be something worse than the targeting of the food. So this is the reason why we're here. We have a fantastic panel today. We're very privileged to have them. I'll introduce them one by one as they speak. But first of all, we're going to show a short video of some of the key points that Elena Duhan, the Special United Nations Rapporteur, made regarding her preliminary findings after visiting Venezuela back in February this year. So please go ahead with the video.
In Venezuela, the United Nations Human Rights Rapporteur presented a report on the situation in Venezuela in the face of the unilateral course of sanctions imposed by the US government against the country. In a press conference, the UN official shared a preliminary report in which she offered an account of the negative effects of the sanctions imposed by Washington. Elena Dohan explained that after holding meetings with different sectors of the country, she determined that the US blockade considerably affects the development of the Venezuelan people. She noted with concern how the unilateral measures applied against Venezuela, its institutions and assets abroad violate international law.
By secondary sanctions or the fear of them, donors and international humanitarian NGOs, beneficiaries of assistance from the international organizations traditionally financed by Venezuela, while low-income people, women, children, and people with special needs or chronic or severe diseases are affected most with regard to the whole scope of human rights, including civil, political, social, cultural, and economic rights, as well as the right to development. I welcome reports of the Venezuela's government greater engagement.
Thank you very much for that. I should have said that I'm Francisco Dominguez. I'm the secretary of the Venezuela Solidarity Campaign, which is the organization that is organizing this. And just to let everybody know that there is a simultaneous translation from English into Spanish. So if anybody needs to do that, just follow the instructions. You need to go to the little icon with a globe, click on it, and choose the language that you want. The second thing we're going to do is we're going to have a video of Christine Blower. Christine Blower is Baroness Christine Blower. She is a Labour member of the House of Lords. She was the 11th General Secretary of the National Union of Teachers, that a union represented qualified teachers across England and Wales, which later on this union became the National Education Union, where Christine is still active. She is the vice chair of the pressure group Unite Against Fascism, indicating her commitment to the struggle against racism and fascism. She has been and still remains a strong and consistent supporter of the struggle for justice and national sovereignty in Latin America. The reason to have greetings and speech that she sent us in a video. Please go ahead with the video.
Comrades and friends, I'm delighted to offer solidarity greetings to this rally. My name is Christine Blower. I'm a member of the House of Lords in the UK, nominated by Jeremy Corbyn, and a former trade union leader. This important rally falls, of course, on Venezuela's Independence Day, and we offer solidarity greetings, particularly to Venezuela on that occasion. As internationalists, we follow much of what goes on all around the world, and importantly, of course, what goes on in Latin America. And we will all know that Venezuela has been under enormous pressure from outside, from the US and other countries. And we also know that Brazil has been under enormous pressure, the Brazilian people, from their own government. We know that the Brazilian people need to be rid of Bolsonaro and his current policies and politics. So we will learn a lot this evening in support of Lula, in support of Venezuela. I wish I could be with you, but I'm sure it would be a great success. Thank you for being here. Solidarity.
It's great to know that the support for Venezuela's national sovereignty and the struggle for self-determination has support even in the House of Lords in Great Britain. Our first presidential speaker is going to be Maria Rodriguez. She's already in there. She's an activist of the CLAP system, the Committees for the Supply and Production. She's a representative, she will be speaking Spanish. The local committees of supply and production, or CLAPs, as they are known in Venezuela, is the central system of food distribution that ensures that the sanctions actually do not really hurt people as much as they would like to. And it benefits regularly millions of people. And Maria, as many women comrades, as many activists in Venezuela, as many people in Venezuela, is at the forefront of this struggle. Maria, the floor is yours.
Muy buenas tardes.
Hello,
María Rodríguez.
I'm Maria Rodriguez. It's great to have this day of celebration for our country. We are celebrating our independence. We share with the world our way of life and what we feel and our resistance as well. This is an opportunity to be here. I would like to talk about how these CLAP committees were formed in 2016 in Venezuela. So this was shortly after we lost Hugo Chavez. There was a terrible attack. This was in some ways even worse than what happened when he was alive. There was an attack on the key engine of the Bolivarian revolution, namely women. That's currently the case. We were the worst affected. The measures were exclusively aimed to reduce our political participation and our exercising powers in the territories. For this reason, we set up the CLAP strategy, local committees for supply and production. This allowed us to retain our key roles. It was very hard in 2015. We were queuing to get food for our homes, for our families. Venezuela is a country where women have made much progress. The class and gender roles and patriarchy imposed on us. We're the ones responsible for running homes, for caring for people, and for food, in fact. So we had to queue to get basic food. Collapse started in 2016, in the first quarter. We were the first people to act in the forefront. We knew that we had to sort out the issue of food for our families. So in the Caribbean, women are good at cooperating. So we came together in love to resist. We managed to ensure that enough food was handed out, so we got to territories with our food. So first of all, we organized transport was needed. We set up a quota of money to pay for transport to go to the central food stores. Then we brought specific quantities for each family according to current quantities. We always try to make sure that this food was balanced nutritionally. We knew it was a war situation, but we knew that we had to overcome. We've been coming out of extreme poverty in our country. Comandante Chavez helped make sure that we could all eat 3 times a day or 5 times a day. So our children, our sons and daughters could grow up healthier than they had been. Also, the IQ, intelligence figures for our children was going up a lot. This is thanks to our activism relating to food. So we reached territories with this food, and it was a great celebration. That's what it was. It was like a big party indeed. We started in 2016. We did a pilot study dreamed up by Chavez. So at this time, there were just 4 people coordinating to cover over 3,000 families. The average number of people in each family was 5 people.
And we managed this. Nobody died of hunger. We reached each and every home to see how many family members there were, what their nutritional status was, and that allowed us to come up with a fair and equitable distribution of the food according to the needs. And we've got better at this over the years. We've managed to overcome the blockade, and we have food in boxes. We were able to ensure animal protein intake, which I guess was one of the most difficult foods to come by at a national level. And in the north coastal area of Venezuela is where we see the greatest concentration of population. So it made it more difficult because in our fields, which are very fertile because they are tropical, and also as an outcome of oil production, a lot of the power was in the central government, and nevertheless, that wasn't a mistake. I think Venezuelans were able to build our future following our rhythm. And I think that's partially why from outside it can be difficult for people to understand the way we are, why we are very often late to events, but it's not that we are late, it's that we are rebel, we are Caribbean. And with that rebel spirit, we grew our movement, and now we have many more people involved in the collapse to redistribute power. And as we organized our territories in the specific case of this pilot test, we set up collapse to distribute the workload because the responsibility was great. And nowadays, beyond the collapse, we have the P for production, because we were saying that we couldn't just continue importing the amount of food we were importing because the conditions didn't allow for this. So that we had to go back to our essence and our roots and rescue our food sovereignty and food security. At that time, these two rights were being violated. The coercive measures against Venezuela, the first thing they did was to try and repress women. We saw this immediately, but even today, even 6 years down the lane, we can tell the world that the Venezuelan women will not shut up and will not stay at home, and we will not give up our freedom and our rebel spirit. We are out in the streets ready to continue fighting, and that is why today the local committees for supply and production are also spaces of love and contention, because these times when women are faced with a lot of political and community violence, so we come together in these spaces to resist, because these coercive measures have worsened, and this has also led to an increase in violence against women. The gangs are trying to shut the voices of women because we are resisting, we're not willing to give up our territory. And because when we, together with Commander Chavez, came up with a political project for the country, we refused to give birth to kids for gangs and to give up our daughters for prostitution. And that is why we continue fighting every single day to guarantee our food sovereignty and food security. Basically, that is how the claps are organized. It's a political and organizational structure whose main goal is to guarantee access to food for all Venezuelans in equal conditions, and the more, those who need the more deserve the most. Thanks for listening. Thanks for keeping an eye out for this beautiful country that always will welcome you with open hearts. We firmly believe that solidarity is the only way to change this world into a world where everyone has their space.
Very much, Maria, for such a inspiring contributions, and she's inspiring, telling us the experience of real ordinary people. Many people keep asking us sometimes in meetings that we organize, how is it possible that Venezuela still continues to be standing up? I think Maria explains it so eloquently. That's the reason. It's people at the bottom of the ladder, organizing in every possible way, making sure that their participatory democracy works and works for them in the way they decide. And that's why the Venezuelan revolution is invincible, and that's why solidarity is absolutely essential. Now, we in the Venezuela Solidarity Campaign are obviously organizing solidarity. This is our job. We've been here for about more than 10 years, more than a decade. We have done a huge number of things, and we want to continue doing, especially now that Venezuela needs it so much. So I want to ask our Vice Chair, Sue Gray, to tell us a little bit more about the Venezuela Solidarity Campaign and why, if you haven't joined, you should. Sue, please.
Thank you, Francisco, and thanks for inviting me to this meeting. Yes, just to say a little bit more about the campaign. As Francisco says, we've been campaigning in support of Venezuela's national sovereignty and its right to make its own decisions since Chavez's early years. But of course, Venezuela's neighbor, the USA, wants to replace the government with one that's more compliant and which will give them access to Venezuela's oil. Now, not many people in the UK get the opportunity to see Venezuela for themselves. So countering misinformation has always been an important part of what we do. And that was particularly the case in the early days. The UK press tends to follow the hostile line taken by the US. So if we see factual errors or obviously biased reporting in the newspapers or TV, we do try to complain. But it can be a time-consuming task, and we can't always give it priority. So we're very grateful when members of VSC have taken the trouble to write letters. Now, the tactics that are used by the opposition in Venezuela has varied over the years, and much of it has been funded by the USA, with millions of dollars being awarded to hostile groups and NGOs within Venezuela. And there have been attempts to undermine or boycott elections. There were calls for street violence. There were massive propaganda campaigns. At times, there were artificial shortages and hoarding of goods. So these events were invariably badly reported in the UK. So we produced our own regular magazine and briefing documents to try and explain exactly what's going on. And we've hosted Venezuelan visitors, we've sent delegations to Venezuela, and our members have regularly acted as observers at elections in Venezuela. And of course, we've had lots of public meetings and other events. And the campaign's grown a lot over the 10 years or so, thanks to the support of major trade unions and a lot of individual supporters and volunteers. Since 2015, as we've heard, the US has imposed increasingly harsh sanctions. These have damaged the economy, they've obstructed trade, they've caused more serious shortages of goods and hardship to the people, as we've heard. And they don't just affect Venezuela directly, they're also affecting other countries or companies that trade with Venezuela or handles Venezuelan transactions. For example, recently, a payment for COVID vaccines was blocked by a Swiss bank that didn't want to handle a transaction involving Venezuela. So, campaigning against the sanctions has been a major focus of our work for quite a long time now, and it's become even more important during the pandemic, although it's had to take different forms. We're active on Facebook and Twitter, and we've held online meetings like this one, and we write articles for various news outlets, blogs, and there's our own website as well. We currently have 2 petitions going. One is about the withholding of Venezuelan gold by the Bank of England, which I think Francisco mentioned briefly. And another one is about condemning US sanctions. So please sign up if you haven't already. I think, well, there are details on the website, and I think we're going to have details put in the chat at some point. We've also joined the campaign in support of Alex Saab, who you'll hear more about shortly. Finally, we'd normally have a point in the meeting, in a kind of normal meeting, where we pass a bucket round for donations, and we can't do that today. But we do still need funds to support our work. So I'll end by saying, please make a donation if you can afford it. Join the campaign if you haven't already. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook and keep on supporting the campaign. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sue, for that. The message is loud and clear. We need your support because the work we do is important and helps the people of Venezuela in their struggle for self-determination. Our next speaker, we are very privileged to have Joao Pedro Stedile, who is the national coordinator of Brazil Landless movement, Movimento Sem Terra. The Landless movement of Brazil, the Movimento Sem Terra, the MST, I think is probably the largest social movement in Latin America. Joao Pedro is an economist with further studies in the National Autonomous University of Mexico. And the MST is central to the struggle for reform in Brazil, and is in itself, the MST is in itself a popular university with a library, which I've managed to visit and see things, extraordinarily well stocked with all kinds of thousands of books and publications. They even have their own publishing house, Expressão Popular. And the MST distributes thousands of tons of food to poor communities in Brazil. And I had the personal experience of actually enjoying, their activities in São Luís de Maranhão when I visited the place. So, Joao Pedro, please go ahead. Thank you very much for being with us.
Olá, companheiros e companheiras.
Hello, dear friends, dear colleagues. Good evening. Good afternoon to you all. I am very pleased to be participating in an activity to show solidarity with Venezuela from Europe. And I'd like to congratulate the whole team and the committee for taking this initiative in the UK. We have deep admiration for the European people and for the historical struggles from the Commune in Paris up until the 20th century. But unfortunately, right now, you are under the boot of unhealthy governments everywhere in Europe today. And they continue with their colonial mindset. They continue believing that the world was created in Europe. Here in Latin America, very few people realize, but we continue under the influence of European colonies in Belize, in the French Guinea, these French governments that call themselves democratic, and in the UK, where you still have the Falkland Islands. It's ours, it's Argentinian, it's Latin American. But I know that here today I am talking with dear friends and comrades in our struggle, and I am very happy for this. The UK was one of the countries that gave more solidarity militants to fight in the civil war in Spain. And we will never forget this, such as Ken Loach, who recorded this in his beautiful film. But we are here to nurture this socialist revolutionary value, the value of solidarity. Solidarity isn't charity. Solidarity is a principle for life, which is fundamental to change capitalism.
El individualismo. Y nosotros soñamos
on individualism. We dream of another system of life. We dream of a system based on solidarity, based on equality, social equality, a system where there aren't any differences because of your race or your nationality. We're all equal. We all are equal all throughout the world. So that's why I congratulate you for having this event. This is a commemorative date. Commemorates the independence of Venezuela. And I hope that in this climate of solidarity, all of you over there in England gave freedom to Assange. Assange is our colleague. He's a brother. He is not Australian. He is Latin American. He's a socialist. He's from the world. So if you free Assange from prison, you will be helping Latin Americans. You will be allowing journalists not to be in fear of saying the truth, despite the problems of Biden, for instance,
En esos meses.
who won the election saying he'll be the largest Democrat in the world. What has he done in the past few months? The same thing as Trump. He continues with his aggressive policy
De Guantánamo,
against
donde
Venezuela. He still has the Guantanamo base, where hundreds of people, particularly from the Arab world, were there without being rightfully accused. And that is who Biden is. Why isn't he talking about the Assange accusations this week? The main testimony in the process in the United States, he said he was bought off by the CIA. He acknowledged that everything he'd said was a lie. So he was never a witness of any crimes that Assange could have committed. On the contrary, actually. I did not come here, however, to talk just about that. I came here to show my solidarity with our Venezuelan colleagues and comrades, like Maria said.
una resistencia impresionante.
Venezuela has shown a wonderful resistance. I've been there several times since the Bolivarian process of change. And I have been accompanying this process for the past 20 years, the behavior of people. And I've seen that Venezuela is a victim of a foreign tactic built by the US, which is also part of this book that we translated, that we published in Portuguese, and we have translated. Like Francisco said,
¿Qué quiere decir? Se dio cuenta,
in Portuguese it's called
precio muy alto.
United States realized that they paid a very high price
Desde que entró en
with
Irak,
military attacks since an invasion, since they entered Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, and now Syria. They lost in all of these countries, and also the people,
la
the
insanidad.
American people, paid with their own lives
Mismo el gobierno imperialista y sus
this
empresas
irresponsibility. And this imperialist government and all of these companies, despite them having so much money, they did not solve the problems, neither of these countries nor of the American economy. So these wars were horrible. They were not useful, not even in the interest of capital. So this theory of hybrid wars, how to give coups, how to support governments, how to act without using the Marines, because they're very pricey. They could be even birders on TV. For over 60 years, we've seen these tactics of hybrid wars
todo lo que uno
being
puede
used against Venezuela. Everything and anything
violencia.
you can think of. Violence, attacks, everything of that they used. They even started with trying to assassinate President Maduro. There are even some uncertainties about
Esa estupidez
Hugo Chávez's death. Also, the humanitarian stupidity,
dólares de
They're
sus exportaciones
preventing Venezuela from using the dollars from their oil exports to buy whatever they want to. It's their money in the end of the day, it's their oil, but what they want to buy is medicines and food. We're talking about food today. I am part of the MST, the Landless movement, and we've always tried to show solidarity, to exchange seeds with Venezuelan peasants, to exchange agroecological techniques.
una escuela de
And with
agroecología.
Chavez, we have promoted an agroecological school.
Agradecernos puso el nombre de Paulo Freire.
He thanked us by giving one of these schools the name of Paul Freire. And that school, Pablo Freire School,
que
has
son
been training people, giving them agroecology techniques, which grow healthy food, real food, and not all of the
testimonios de la
food
valentía
that large companies create. So we have seen how brave these people are. We know that the Americans have shown every single tactic against them. The only thing they haven't done is
colombianos iban
they
a
haven't
hacer
gone for the military invasion because they thought others would, but they haven't. They thought the Colombians would do it, but they didn't. The Colombians still have solidarity for their neighbors, for their brothers. They all come from the big Colombia, and now they're celebrating independence after the Carabobo battle, where the Creole people showed against the Spanish armies. They still
sus
go around
deudos.
trying to subject us, not using horses now. Now they buy us. They buy fake leaders.
Casillas
You see them. You see they have
y otros
Leopoldo
España.
Guaidó,
Quédense por ahí.
other of the same
Entonces,
style.
Venezuela
So stay there. We don't want you to come back. So Venezuela,
de soberanía.
like Maria said,
El
is
pueblo
leading a sovereignty struggle. The people have a right to decide their own future.
el derecho de tener sus
Part of a people's sovereignty is
Ahora
to have their own foods. But no, now they're in war. They're resisting. Like Maria
Seguridad.
said, CLAP is one way to ensure food security.
bolivariano
But the Bolivarian project is a sovereignty, food sovereignty project. We should be able, and this is what this means, we should be able to have the resources, and there are enough resources in Venezuela so that they can produce as many foods as they need.
ya están
They
muy
don't need to produce wheat. They have
satisfechos.
enough with corn, with
Venezuela ellos tienen
potatoes, with yuca. So the Venezuelans have the right to produce as many foods as they want, as are part of their cuisine. The problem is that the US and UK blockade, they're stealing their resources, oil,
que Francisco
dollars, even gold they're stealing. We're even denouncing this.
un día
So this is really shameful.
haría.
And
Pero
one
ahora
day it will be accounted for. But for now, what we can say is that the whole of Latin America is showing their solidarity with Venezuela, and we
esa
are
batalla
certain that they will win this battle. It might be a longer battle than that of Carabobo, but they will win because we have the same enemies. So we're used to battling gringos, Spaniards, and others of the same type. I really hope
cambios en Perú,
that
con
the
los
winds coming from the Andes, with
Colombia.
changes in Peru and Chile, and even actually in Colombia, people are standing up, and also in Brazil. And soon we will turn down
Entonces,
this shitty government. We hope we can enter a new
Los
process, a new cycle of mass mobilization to do these structural changes that our peoples need.
el pueblo de Venezuela nos
And
han
the people
dado
of Cuba and of Venezuela, they have shown us so much. They can do whatever they want. They can steal our gold, our money. They can steal whatever they want, but they will never steal our dignity. And when people when the people walk with dignity, they are invincible. And that is how the history goes. Francisco and other comrades, big hugs. Thank you, big hugs. Thank you for your presentation, Joao Pedro.
Your contribution, the eloquence with which you depicted, the situation of Venezuela and the reality of Latin America, subjected to the aggression by various gringos over the centuries, is extremely eloquent, absolutely sharp. And I think the spice that you add with some of strong words made it even better, as we say, or better, as we say here in London. The talking about food and talking about sanctions and talking about aggression is totally clear by now that what the United States are doing to Venezuela has got nothing to do with democracy. That was their claim in the past. They're not even claiming that anymore. There's nothing to do with human rights. The worst violator of human rights on the Venezuelan people is the United States because of the sanctions and because of the aggression. And one of the things they have done, which is sinister, is targeting food. They're not only targeting food, they're targeting finances, commerce, trade, medicine, and everything, including vaccines. But food is, the idea is to deny food to the Venezuelan people so that they despair. And in desperation, they somehow go crazy, explode socially, and then they justify some kind of external intervention. And one example of this, we have it in Alex Saab that Sue Gray mentioned earlier on. Alex Saab is a diplomat who is a businessman who was conducting business to obtain resources and food and medicine, energy, and so on for Venezuela. And as a result of the intervention of the United States, he has been detained illegally. He's been imprisoned illegally in Cape Verde. And what wonders, what has got the United States to do with somebody who is doing business for Venezuela with other countries, have nothing to do with the United States, and is in Cape Verde where he is being detained. So we have a short video that we want to show you, which is from the Venezuelan General Attorney, who explained exactly what his situation actually is, also very eloquently. Please, let's go ahead with the video.
El caso de Alex Saab ha sido utilizado con saña, con mucha infamia, para atacar la institucionalidad venezolana, en tanto su detención fue totalmente ilegal. Yo la califico de secuestro. Él tiene un fuero diplomático que lo asiste. Él hacía muchísimas actividades totalmente ilícitas en pro, como tú bien lo señalaste, de la adquisición de medicinas, de alimentos, etc. Y en medio de una de esas actividades fue detenido de manera ilegal. Según él mismo ha señalado, se le ha violado totalmente sus derechos humanos, su derecho a la defensa, al debido proceso. Pretenden presentarlo como un trofeo de una guerra, pareciera no de cuarta generación ya, sino de quinta, de sexta generación, en donde, como inicialmente referíamos, a personas que pudieran ser totalmente de una manera, se la presentan de otra para criminalizar. No es algo nuevo, ojo. Eso antes se hacía a través de la radio, la prensa y la televisión. Lo que pasa es que el poder de las redes en este momento, con alguien con un teléfono en la mano, que ya no de pronto teclea algo para conectarse con un televisor, con una radio, lo hace en tiempo real, en cuestión de segundos, y empieza entonces el laboratorio. En el caso de el embajador Alex Saab es un ejemplo, pero muchos de nosotros, los que estamos acá en responsabilidad de Estado, se nos ha hecho campañas similares para luego terminar sancionados. ¿Sancionados por qué y a cuenta de qué? Bueno, de listas que son presentadas en centros de poder mundial para, por ejemplo, me tocó a mí ir a La Haya a defender lo que corresponde como fiscal general en relación al trabajo inherente a nuestra responsabilidad pública y tuvimos que pedir permisos especiales para algo tan, yo diría, sencillo, normal en la civilización actual. Pero la idea finalmente es esa, ¿no? Colocar trabas, obstáculos a un trabajo, penalizar y criminalizar, buscar el linchamiento moral. Yo estoy en contra de todo eso y hay que enfrentarlo con valentía, con dignidad.
Well, that makes it totally clear, not only from our own perception, which is correct, but also from somebody who, you know, has the expertise and is in charge of this. So in this case, there's no question about it that the United States is determined to asphyxiate the people of Venezuela by hunger if they can, by any other means if they can. So it is extremely important that we do everything we can. There is a campaign internationally. There is a campaign in the United States, also in Canada. We have done some campaign over here and we need to step it up because it is quite important. It's extremely important that he's not extradited to the United States. We cannot allow him to be extradited to the United States. That will be very bad for Alex Saab himself, but it will be extremely terrible internationally for the international rule of law, because it will set such a precedent that the United States will go around the place using, you know, its power extraterritorially, illegally, as a bully, just doing anything once against anybody by attacking individual. So please follow us on this one and, you know, join and find out about the campaigns in the United States, in Canada and elsewhere regarding this, because it is important that we do not allow the United States to get away with this. Our final speaker, but last but not least, is Carlos Ron. Carlos Ron is the president of Simón Bolívar Institute for the Peace and Solidarity among the Peoples of the World. He is an extremely active leader of the Venezuelan process. There is not one single day I'm aware of, not that I follow him necessarily every day, but I'm aware that every single day, his institute, he's extremely active, he's linking up with organizations everywhere in the world. And the difference of the institute is that not only it organizes solidarity with Venezuela, but also gives solidarity to struggles of peoples, social movements, and so on around the world. It's a two-way system, which obviously is a very interesting novelty. Carlos has, you know, the Carlos Institute, the institute he presents, he's the president of, has organizations and meetings with organizations from Africa, Asia, Latin America, Europe, and so on. Carlos, we are delighted to have you with us. Please, the floor is yours. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you very much. Muchas gracias, hermano.
Thank you very much, my brother, Francisco. It's a great pleasure to be here. I really appreciate this solidarity opportunity to talk about reality in Venezuela. So greetings to Ian, who's helped set this up with that great presentation about CLAP. Also, John Pedro, you've shown so much solidarity with us, you always have, with our struggles. It's really a hard act to follow. I'm going to try and make a contribution now to the discussion. I think I need to highlight a few points. So Joao Pedro mentioned this. What's going on now is a hybrid war against Venezuela. It's focused on attacking those things that the Bolivarian resolution has in some ways overcome. So neoliberalism has been so destructive for Venezuela. Specifically, nutrition, access to food, The revolution, as Maria said, had made great progress. It had overcome years of extreme poverty. It was around 80% of the population in the country previously. We had made a real, we reached a real milestone. We had achieved so much through the revolution, through the measures imposed by the revolution. This was a key plank of the attacks against Venezuela then. They wanted to weaken not just the revolution itself and its achievements. They wanted to bring down the morale of the Venezuelan people. We've seen how this works. So the unilateral measures of this war, this hybrid war, are illegal. The only sanctions recognized under international law are the ones imposed by the Security Council of the UN. However, the US imposes so-called sanctions. They're illegal, unilateral. What they're trying to do in the end is to push us towards their ultimate goal. They want to topple the Venezuelan government. These measures have promoted a certain idea. In the US and elsewhere, in Europe, for example, they say it's better to use coercive measures than have a full-on war. So they're trying to sell the idea that these wars are just to attack certain people, President Maduro, certain elements in the government, and so on. What they don't say is this. Really, they're attacking the entire Venezuelan people. When you don't have enough food, there are shortages, you can't get the inputs to make food, then that hits the whole people. And not just the president or his government team. In the case of Venezuela, most recent case, we've seen this also in Jeffrey Sachs in the US, for example, Mark Weisman as well. They've been talking about at least 6,000 people who have died because of this blockade. We're not just talking about a blockade anymore. What's going on is this. We are under siege. We're surrounded in Venezuela, like in the Middle Ages, when you lay siege to a castle until people gave up. That is the type of attack we have now. There is persecution against anybody who wants to help, who wants to make a contribution, or indeed to set up any pathway for Venezuela to be able to import food. That's what we're talking about here. I'd like to make an interesting comparison. Saddam Hussein in Iraq during the Gulf War was under sanctions legally. This was done by the UN Security Council, and Saddam Hussein was allowed to sell oil for food and medicine. That is not permitted for Venezuela today, not even that. That's how it is today. We need to remember this. And people within the US, even Democrats, have recognized that that's the way it is. So there are supposedly exceptions in the sanctions to enable imports of food and medicines, but they don't work. Just a few days ago, the US issued a license just now, halfway through 2021, a license for us supposedly to be able to acquire the medical supplies to fight the pandemic. June 2021. So that supposedly there are these exceptions. It's just not true. What we see is a ferocious attack on the morale and the life of Venezuelans. So we were importing 80% of our food because that's our rent-based economy. So just imagine the effect if you impose a blockade on incoming food. So now they're blockading other related things. For example, gasoline, and other inputs for producing gasoline. That then has a further effect. Distribution of food and storage and general development of agriculture. Nonetheless, it's important to know this. Despite this, the great strength of Venezuela is this: it's popular organization. You've got a government that is fighting to protect the people's rights, and that's not all. The people are responding through popular organization, people's organization. I'll give you an example. The people-to-people plan, or town-to-town. You've got healthy production going on, the agricultural production of food, and that's linked up with communities in Caracas, in urban areas, to ensure that we have this exchange of food to get around these measures to attack us, so through the clap system and other government measures. There's another important point in this action to recognize. How have they been acting for the last 2 years? I suggest that you look at the work done by Clara Sanchez of Venezuela. She's worked on this issue. So attacks have been made through the mass media, the US government, and the National Assembly under Juan Guaido. They've been using these 3 attack elements to smear the clap campaign. They've used the media. They've tried to criminalize what's been done. There's no basis for the investigations they've been carrying out. But we find the New York Times printing articles, El País in Spain, Semana in Colombia. It's a coordinated attack in the mass media to attack the clap system and criminalize it.
They're saying that the elements have been bought when the reality is that the value of that food isn't even a fourth of what they have to pay in the private market. And all of this is to smear the clap, to attack it, to then justify the sanctions. There's a program that is there to guarantee the food for the people, and it's being attacked. This is pure terrorism. There's no other way of calling it. We have examples of companies that have gone bankrupt. In 2020, there's several companies, including Schleger Business Group, which agreed to exchange oil for food. They weren't paid in money, they were paid in oil. And the US attacked the people doing business with Venezuela and managed to make these companies go bankrupt. And that impeded them from having any further trade deals with Venezuela. And that was just because they were exporting food to Venezuela. In Mexico, before the current government, as a set of the actions, the Lima group was attacking companies that were sending food to Venezuela, and they had to even pay a penalty fee that was taken. There was funds that were going to ACNUR to then support the Venezuelan refugees in Venezuelan refugees. I mean, the important thing of this is that that money never even reached the UNHCR, and it was lost along the way. So all of this, and to conclude, what I wanted to prove to you is how the combination of big media corporations, the measures taken in the US to criminalize Venezuela, and with the connivance of the assembly in hand of Juan Guaido, and the case of Alex Saab is an example of this. All of this is part of this hybrid war to attack the Venezuelan state, to demoralize the Venezuelan people, and to topple the government. Today, Trump's administration is no longer there. Guaido is no longer there, and the people are out in the street fighting every single day to guarantee their food sovereignty, with a strong will to continue defending our rights. Thank you very much for listening.
That's exactly the spirit. You know, this is what has made the people of Venezuela to continue standing up, to continue struggling. It's been a wonderful group of panelists. We do not have a great deal of time, but we have some questions that we, fortunately, we cannot take all the questions that have been asked, but some questions have been asked. And the first question I will address to Maria. I understand she's ready. Maria, what are the worst effects of the US sanctions on the importation of food to Venezuela? You have to unmute.
¿Tienes el micro?
Voy. Listo, ¿me oyen?
Ready?
Yes.
Can you hear me now? Yes, yes, we can hear you now.
Ahora sí.
Yes, sí, te oímos, te oímos.
Ok.
Okay. So I think the most difficult thing in these sanctions came last year and the year before that, and that was a very high rate of malnutrition due to undernourishment in our children, right? And last year with the pandemic, obviously this became worse because I don't know if you know Venezuela, but Venezuela has many, many food programs. There's the school food program, for instance, and beyond having subsidized food for families, kids at schools have the possibility of accessing health, safe, and nutritious food. When the pandemic hit and the sanctions were increased, obviously our food sovereignty there was put at risk. And the worst thing you can do to people is to see, for the people to see its own citizens malnourished. That was one of the most serious impacts, but I think there is another one, which is the real intention behind these coercive measures, and that is to undermine the mental health of the Venezuelan people. The Venezuelan people are used to fighting and resisting with love and joy. And what they managed to do is to penetrate into our minds, because they made it so difficult that it was impossible to get out of the well, and it actually neutralized many people. The unemployment rates were very high and the poverty was made worse. And I think with these coercive measures, they've been upping the pressure. And for me, the toughest part that I've had to experience as a Venezuelan mother and woman is this malnutrition for low uptake of nutrients and malnourishment because of a high intake of ultra-processed food. As our comrade from the MST said, the relationships we had and still have of solidarity with the MST, this allowed the Venezuelan people to have access to healthy food. And obviously, when the sanctions against Venezuela were increased, we had to feed the people and we had to guarantee access to food. There are a lot of empty carbohydrates that worsen the basic diseases such as cancer, high blood pressure, gastrointestinal diseases when there is a malnutrition due to an excessive intake of processed food. This worsens these conditions, which are the deadliest, and it has a very strong impact on our children. I think this war ultimately is aimed at doing away with the health of the Venezuelan people to try and stop our future generations. I don't think it's as simple as pointing at someone's head with a pistol. I think it's easier to have a face-to-face war than what we are seeing now, because right now different types of wars are being forged on Venezuela to try and end our spiritual resistance. That is why I said that one of the big effects has been in terms of the mental health of the Venezuelan people, and that is what has led to a massive exodus of the Venezuelan people. When the pandemic started and the Venezuelan people realized that their families were here waiting for them and resisting, and that they had a diversity of ways of feeding ourselves, and when we remembered how our grandparents had food from the activist spaces for food and nutrition, well, then that made many come back. That is why many Venezuelans have come back, and our people continue to believe in this country because our spirit will never be defeated. This Caribbean and resistance spirit and the Piaroa and the Cariña and the different indigenous peoples in the Amazon and in the South, all of our Afro-descendant blood running in us, they are today more alive than ever in Venezuela because Simon Bolivar and they perished in the war, but they were liberators, and they are in our spirits when we feed our people, in our blood that we transform into milk when we feed our babies. It's unfortunate that we don't have more time, but in Venezuela, one of the biggest fights we've had against the oil industry was that we had 70% breastfeeding rate, so they will never manage to overthrow our spirit. We have yuca, chicken, pork, and we have food, and we are fighting and resisting. So what they're trying to do is damage our mental health to defend our spirit, and we are here fighting and resisting.
Some complications there, but it was extremely eloquent and absolutely excellent. You know, what Maria is telling us is really the policy that Carl was describing of economic terrorism. And one of the things that it affects the most vulnerable, the poorest, the weakest, the ill, the chronically ill. I mean, this seems to be deliberately so sinister. And the indigenous population in many places are at the bottom of the scale. And talking about that, one of the interesting developments in Latin America recently has been the fact, if I may allow to do this, of the Constitutional Convention in Chile yesterday elected Elisa Loncon Antileo, a Mapuche woman, as the president of the constituency of the Constitutional Convention, which is extraordinary. And this is what brings me into asking Comrade Joao Pedro the question. There are regional prospects, interesting taking place. They're taking place in Bolivia. They certainly have taken place in Peru. They are now taking place in Chile in a dramatic fashion. They are changing completely the landscape of Latin America. And you mentioned that in your first contribution. So what are the regional prospects after all of that? How do you see the situation in the region developing? And we are very interested, obviously, in the giant of Latin America in Brazil. Joao Pedro.
Muchas gracias, Francisco.
Thank you so much, Francisco, for that question. I'll try keeping it short and try summarizing or assessing the changes that we are seeing in Latin America to share with all of you in Europe. Since 2014 until today, our continent has been under a deep structural crisis. It was the outcome of the crisis of the capitalist production model, which started in the north, in the large economies, and it then permeated down to us. And this crisis of the capitalist production model affected several situations in the people's lives. It affected democracy because the US, due to this crisis and to the fact that the US was losing power to the Chinese, was trying to foster servile governments in its backyard. So they were doing all sorts of things to control governments in Central America. Look at what's happening in Haiti. Haiti doesn't have a government. It doesn't have a Congress. It has no judiciary. Who's leading in Haiti? It's the US ambassador who's the maximum authority. That's what happened with the coup against Dilma. They needed a government in Brazil that would bow to their needs. So we had 4 or 5 years of a very difficult situation. And just as the large US corporations tried controlling the market, but especially here in Latin America, they tried controlling the good of Mother Nature. You all know that at times of crisis, of this capitalist crisis, capitalists will always try to privatize nature and the resources which are common goods: forests, land, water, biodiversity, mining resources, oil, copper.
When they transform natural goods into commodities, they're able to take over. In 1856, in his home in London, Karl Marx was already telling us about it. And 150 years ago, he already explained how the capital would be behaving. So throughout Latin America, we've also been suffering from this attack by large capitals to control nature. In Brazil, we have forgotten about the large list of natural crimes. So at this time, we have over 20,000 poor people who invaded indigenous land in the border with Venezuela to look for gold and diamonds. 20,000 people, they're there. They're
Dios mío.
going all around these indigenous lands looking for gold and diamonds. You know who they're selling these gold and diamonds to?
Canadiense.
They're selling them to companies, a British company and a Canadian company. So who is financing these people? Who is telling them to commit these humanitarian and environmental crimes against indefense people? It's the large companies, the large capital companies. And they did the same with Brazilian soy. And that is how capital works. Going back to the political sphere, what happened? What's happened is that capitalism is in crisis, even though governments have changed and they have used lawfare techniques created by the Germans, and then the gringos went all for it. This technique tries to transform the legal way to put politicians in trial. It started with Correa. He cannot go back to Ecuador. He will go to jail if he does. His vice president actually went to jail. And they put people in jail because of lies. Because of this lawfare, which people actually don't even know what it is, and we don't even have that in our language, but it is a control way. So the big contradiction with these crises of capitalism and their old ways is that if capitalism does not meet basic needs of people, then there will be conflict. People think, and people do not starve just because someone wants to. And the rapporteur of the Venezuelan people would not stay silent. So this is a great contradiction. Even if they manage to control all governments outside of, except for Cuba and Venezuela, because everyone else is under their control. Many politicians went to prison. And then what happened? People realized what was happening. And then there was a reaction to this. There were social conflicts on the streets sometimes. And also, this is also reflected on the election results. So we find ourselves in a new historic period in Latin America. We are going back to popular initiatives. We also see this in the election results, but we see great transformation as well in structural changes.
Con Lula, que está en la delantera. Va a ganar las elecciones el año que viene. Pero más que ganar las elecciones, Lula está convencido, y nosotros también, que la victoria de Lula no será más de lo mismo. No será el gobierno Lula 3. Seguramente un gobierno Lula en esas circunstancias, producirá cambios estructurales en la sociedad brasileña. Para eso vamos, ¿no? Además de los cambios que están ocurriendo fruto de la crisis en la geopolítica mundial, donde el imperio gringo empieza a se desmoronar y en su lugar sube el bloque económico de Eurasia, con los chinos, India, Indonesia y Rusia. Espero que los chinos, como ahora están celebrando los 100 años de su
I
partido,
hope now that China is celebrating 100 years in their party, I hope they stay true to their principles: humanity, equality, and freedom, because they will be, without a doubt, their new power in the world. So
tiempo. Ahora los
Europeans
tiempos son para los
should
pueblos.
watch out. Your time is long gone. It's now time for the people. And the power is coming from other places. And I'm just saying it so Francisco can smile.
That was a pleasant provocation. We most more than welcome. We don't have a great deal of time, but anyway, the last question I want to ask, thank you very much for that, Joao, Pedro. The last question is to Carlos. Obviously, everybody is thinking that there is some speculation in the media, sometimes more than necessary, regarding the relations, the changing relations between the United States and Venezuela. Can you tell us, how do you see, from a Venezuelan perspective, this relationship, if changes at all?
Yes. Bueno, gracias.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Francisco.
Tenemos que empezar diciendo que a pesar de que este es un nuevo gobierno,
We have to start by saying that even though Biden's government is relatively new, it's different than Trump's government in terms of discourse and the way he shows himself. We see that every day, every week, basically, there's a new set of sanctions from the US against Venezuela. We saw that with Trump, but now we're not seeing that. We're not seeing new measures. However, old measures are still intact. And this is true for us and for Cuba and other countries as well. So now they have a great opportunity. The US people, they've always been solidarity, they've always had solidarity with us. They've always been close to the Venezuelan people. Now they could put pressure on their governments to act accordingly. I think they can. I think there's this will to debuild this sick and criminal measures, because these measures are crimes against humanity. And that is the way international law considers it as well. So I wish that they would use this new context to change these policies, to go back, and so that we have, once again, and this is what we've always wanted, respectful relations and polite relations with the US. I think what's most important, and that's always been the case, Venezuela's always been open to dialogue without giving up our socialist project and our independent project. This means that if they want to talk and if they want to have dialogue, we will absolutely go for it despite our differences. However, if they want to attack us and they want to increase the pressure, then we will go with the same strategy that we have always been applying. We will keep finding new ways to live with these sanctions, and we will be looking for new ways to move forward. The Venezuelan people will not give up on their democracy, on their participatory democracy. We will not give up our independence that today is 210 years old, because whatever happens, we have decided to be free. So I really hope they do make the most of this chance. There are new, different signals, different elements, but so far we have not seen great changes. We have not seen that there will be a different vision
Thank you very much
without
for
this
that
government.
enlightening and hopeful response. I think is accurate. That's what's going on now. This has been extremely educational. We absolutely immensely grateful for the contributions of Christine, Maria, Joao, Pedro, Carlos. We also want to take the opportunity, I want to take the opportunity to thank the team that organized behind the scenes, you know, all the technical side of it as well as everything else and put it together. And certainly I want to also thank the translators. So I want to finally say this. It is absolutely vital that we, not only that we defend Venezuela and therefore we redouble our solidarity, but we want a world which is better. And the precondition for that is that Venezuela survives and goes ahead. And that's exactly our mission. So thank you again to everyone. We are delighted. We are going to organize more events like this. If you haven't joined the organization, thank you, Pedro, who is provoking us from Brazil. And thank you, everyone. Thank you very much. Have a nice rest of the evening.